The veteran Marcus Dean spends his days cutting grass and reading the names of the fallen, trying to atone for a past he cannot forget. But one grave, one without a name, keeps calling to his dog, Scout. Every time someone visits, the shepherd runs to that spot, barking, guarding, as if protecting something buried deep beneath the earth. Then, on one stormy night, Scout begins to dig. When Marcus shines his light into the hole, he freezes. The grave is empty. No body, no coffin, nothing but silence, and a single question that will change everything. Who was buried here, and what were they trying to hide? If you believe some truths should never stay buried, subscribe, comment, and share this story. Now, let's begin. The morning fog lay heavy over the Colorado foothills, curling like slow breath between the pine trunks. Dew glazed the iron gates of the old military cemetery, where silence felt older than stone. Inside that silence lived Marcus Dean, a man built from the same weathered substance as the land itself. 55, tall but slightly stooped, his frame still carried the disciplined tension of a soldier who never stopped standing at attention. His face was a map of small wars, creases cut deep around his eyes, a nose crooked from a long-forgotten brawl, and a short salt and iron beard that grew rough against the wind. He moved with measured economy, every motion deliberate, as if waste itself were a sin. He lived alone in a small caretaker's cabin near the West Gate, a place that smelled of pine, oil, and the faint ghost of gunmetal. His closest companion was Scout, a 9-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat that glimmered bronze when sunlight broke through the fog. Scout's muzzle had turned white around the edges, and his amber eyes held a knowing gravity, as if the dog, too, remembered the noise of mortars and the smell of dust. Marcus used to joke that Scout was the better soldier of the two, obedient, patient, and unshaken by ghosts. Every morning, Marcus brewed a cup of bitter black coffee and carried it outside to the porch. From there he could see the lines of marble headstones, stretching like a regiment frozen in formation. He would read their names aloud, slowly, evenly, until the steam from his cup faded into the cold. Private Alcott, Sergeant Bryant, Lieutenant Daniels. His voice rasped like gravel sliding down steel. It wasn't prayer, it was duty, a ritual of remembrance that kept the noise of guilt at bay, because Marcus had survived a blast that should have ended him 15 years ago. The memory clung to him with surgical precision, the smell of burning wires, the screaming radio, the face of his captain disappearing in smoke. Everyone else in his convoy died. He woke 3 days later under a white hospital light, medals in a box, and a hollow space where his purpose had been. The army gave him a pension and a handshake. The world gave him pity. He wanted neither. So he came here, to the land of the fallen, to work for them instead of for the living. Scout had come from the same war. Once a K-9 tracker trained to detect explosives, he'd been retired after shrapnel left a scar across his hip. Marcus adopted him from a shelter run by veterans. The first night, Scout whimpered in his sleep, paws twitching as if running through a field of ghosts. Marcus reached out and rested his hand on the dog's ribs until the trembling stopped. That was the moment he decided they would share the silence together. By day, Marcus trimmed weeds, mended fences, and polished the old bronze plaques corroded by weather and time. Sometimes local families came to visit, leaving flowers or flags. He would nod politely, offer directions, and retreat into the background. He wasn't unfriendly, just wary. People had a way of breaking the peace here, filling it with unnecessary apologies or stories he'd rather not hear. Scout, however, behaved differently. Whenever visitors approached, He trotted toward a small corner of the cemetery, the oldest section where the stone markers leaned like tired shoulders. He always stopped at the same grave, a blank headstone without name or rank, its surface rougher than the rest. There he would sit, ears raised, eyes fixed, tail low against the grass. At first, Marcus thought it was coincidence. Perhaps a rodent's burrow lay beneath, or the scent of an animal. But Scout returned there again and again, sometimes whining softly, other times lying down as if guarding something invisible. Marcus laughed it off at first. "What is it, boy? You found yourself a ghost?" Yet each night, as he locked the gates, he noticed Scout glancing back toward that corner, reluctant to leave. The caretaker before him, an old man named Tom Greeley, had once mentioned that part of the cemetery was tricky ground. Tom was short and thick-set, with a faded marine tattoo half buried under liver spots. He'd retired the same year Marcus arrived, handing over a ring of rusted keys and a word of warning. "That far corner by the poplars, don't bother cleaning it after dark. The earth there don't like to stay still." Marcus assumed it was the rambling superstition of old soldiers, but now, with Scout's strange fixation, he wasn't so sure. Late one autumn afternoon, storm clouds gathered above the ridges, bruised and heavy. Marcus walked the perimeter, coat collar up, the sky pressing low enough to taste the metal in the air. Scout trotted ahead, sniffing, tail stiff with alertness. When thunder cracked, the dog froze, not with fear, but with recognition, as if the sound awoke something buried deep. Marcus's chest tightened. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself every 4th of July. Rain came suddenly, drenching the cemetery in silver needles. Marcus jogged towards the tool shed, calling for Scout, but the dog had already vanished into the maze of stones. "Scout!" he shouted, voice drowned by wind. He followed the paw prints, mud sucking at his boots, until he saw the shepherd's dark shape by the nameless grave, clawing furiously at the earth. "Stop, leave it!" Marcus grabbed the dog's collar, but Scout pulled free, dirt flying beneath his paws. His growls were low and desperate, not aggressive, pleading. Lightning illuminated the scene in a flash of white. The headstone tilted, mud collapsed, and beneath it gaped a hollow pit. Marcus knelt, heart hammering. The soil was too soft, too shallow. He dug with his hands, ignoring the cold water that burned his skin. Beneath the first few inches there was nothing. No coffin, no wood, only emptiness and a faint metallic glint. He picked it up. A bent dog tag, corroded and unreadable except for a single letter. V. Marcus sat back, rain pouring down his face like tears he didn't want to admit to. Scout stood beside him, chest heaving, soaked to the bone but calm now, eyes locked on the hollow as if confirming what he already knew. The grave was empty. Someone had been remembered without ever being buried. That night the storm cut the power to his cabin. Marcus lit a lantern and sat at his table, the dog tag between his fingers. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from the old trembling that came when memories began to move. He thought of all the names he'd read aloud every morning, each one carrying a life, a story, a death that at least had a body to anchor it. But what about the forgotten? What if this cemetery was full of them? Graves without ghosts, just silence and lies. Scout lay at his feet, ears twitching whenever thunder rumbled. Marcus reached down, feeling the warmth beneath the damp fur. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. The dog's eyes met his, steady, patient, forgiving. "What did you smell, boy? What are we guarding here?" He placed the tag on the table beside his old service medal. The two pieces of metal glinted alike under the lantern light, one earned, one abandoned. He stared until his vision blurred, until the shadows on the wall formed faces he hadn't seen in years. Sergeant Peter Voss, Corporal Daniels, Private Lee, 17 of them, standing again in their dusty boots, waiting for him to speak their names. Outside, the storm eased. The wind settled into a low moan through the pine trees, sounding almost like a voice. Marcus rose, walked to the window, and looked toward the far corner of the cemetery. Even through the rain's haze, he could see Scout sitting upright by the open grave, facing the darkness with unshakable calm. The lantern flickered behind him, casting long, uncertain shadows. Marcus felt a chill, not of fear, but recognition. There was a story buried beneath that ground, a story that someone had gone to great lengths to keep quiet. And somehow his dog, the last soldier who still believed in duty, had chosen him to dig it up. As lightning split the sky one final time, Marcus stepped out into the rain, flashlight in hand. The air smelled of wet earth and rusted iron. Scout turned his head slightly, ears perked, waiting. Marcus knelt beside him, shone the light into the hollow again, and whispered, "All right, partner, let's see what you found." The beam slid across the mud, over the dog tag, and onto something metallic deeper in the hole. Something that glimmered faintly, like the edge of a buried truth waiting to breathe again. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of ash and memory. The earth around the nameless grave was torn and slick, a wound reopened. Marcus Dean stood beside it with his shovel resting on one shoulder, eyes dark under the brim of his cap. He had slept little. When he did close his eyes, he saw flashes of the past, sand, smoke, and 17 faces half erased by time. Scout trotted ahead of him, tail down, muzzle low to the ground, still sniffing the same patch of disturbed soil as if expecting someone to answer from beneath. Marcus cleaned his hands on a rag and looked at the bent dog tag again. The letter V had been scoured by years of rust, but something about it tugged at him like an echo. There had been a Sergeant Peter Voss in his old unit, Bravo 7, back in 1998. A man with sharp blue eyes, a voice that could cut through gunfire, and a smile that carried too much calm for the chaos he commanded. Marcus remembered him clearly. Tall, broad-shouldered, always carrying a cigarette between 2 fingers, though he rarely lit it. Voss used to say, "I don't smoke it. I hold it so my hands don't shake." Marcus returned to the cabin, Scout padding behind him. He pulled down a dusty footlocker from the top shelf and flipped it open. Inside lay old maps, service medals, and a manila folder with brittle edges. He dug through it until his fingers found what he sought. Bravo 7 Unit Report, 1998. The cover was stamped Confidential, Incident at Sector 9. He spread the papers on the table, the lantern light trembling over the faded ink. The report was brief, too brief. It claimed that Bravo 7 had been lost in an accidental fuel explosion during withdrawal operations near Kandahar. No survivors, no remains recovered. Cause, ignition of volatile storage by enemy mortar. Signed by Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Heller. Marcus frowned. He remembered Heller, square jaw, always impeccably clean boots, the kind of man who smiled without warmth. He'd been their superior officer, stationed miles away from the explosion site. Marcus had never seen him at the memorial service. Scout nudged Marcus's knee, sensing his agitation. The veteran's pulse quickened as he flipped through the addendum. Lists of names, serial numbers, and equipment recovered. Except there was something missing. His own name appeared under Transferred to Logistics Support, dated 2 days before the explosion. That was accurate, but below it, there was a blank space where Peter Voss's sign-off should have been. He stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Voss had never signed off because he had never left the base, and the idea that no one ever found his remains, nor those of the 16 others, didn't sit right. He ran a hand through his graying hair, exhaling slowly. "They didn't bury you," he muttered. "They buried the story." By mid-afternoon, Marcus decided to visit the county archive. Scout rode in the passenger seat of his weathered green pickup, head out the window, tongue lolling slightly. The truck rattled down the old mining road toward town, dust curling in its wake. The archive was housed in a squat red brick building near the courthouse. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Behind the counter sat Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the clerk, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair coiled tightly at the nape of her neck. She had the kind of soft, lined face that made people feel immediately seen. Her glasses hung from a chain, and when she spoke, her voice carried both gentleness and suspicion, the tone of someone who had spent too many years around secrets. "Morning, Mr. Dean," she greeted, squinting over the counter. "Haven't seen you since Memorial Day. Looking for someone again?" Marcus nodded. "Sergeant Peter Voss, Bravo 7, 1998. I'm trying to verify burial records." Evelyn pursed her lips. "That's quite a while back. We only have partial digital entries for the late 90s. You'll want the old microfilm reels." She gestured toward a dim corner lined with cabinets. "If it's not there, it's gone." He thanked her and spent the next 2 hours scrolling through pages of faded military dispatches. Scout lay curled beside his chair, head resting on his paws, patient as ever. The reel flickered, revealing headlines that meant little now. Fuel explosion claims 17 soldiers. Families await closure. Yet the more Marcus read, the less closure he felt. There were inconsistencies, wrong coordinates, repeated paragraphs, and identical statements from witnesses who could not have been at the site. He scribbled notes on a scrap of paper. Sector 9 coordinates mismatch, listed 35.443N instead of 35.483N. Typo? Or deliberate? His hand shook slightly. The difference of 40 meters could mean another location entirely, maybe even a cover-up zone. A shadow crossed his table. Evelyn stood there holding a thin envelope. "Found this misfiled in casualty correspondence," she said. "It's addressed to the Department of Records, but never sent. Thought it might belong to your batch." Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a single typewritten sheet, unsigned. It read, "The Bravo 7 site was sealed before the retrieval team arrived. Orders came from above. They said the bodies were unrecognizable. But I saw them. They weren't burned. They were gone." His mouth went dry. "Who filed this?" Evelyn shrugged uneasily. "No name, only initials. PV." Peter Voss. The drive back to the cemetery was silent except for the hum of tires and Scout's soft panting. The sun dipped behind the mountains, staining the sky with the dull orange of spent gunpowder. Marcus parked near the gate and sat in the truck long after the engine died. The thought churned. If Voss had written that note, it meant he survived the explosion, at least for a while. But why fake his death? And who gave the order to erase? Them? That night, he spread his findings across the table like a crime scene. The dog tag, the report, the note. 17 names. He traced them with a calloused finger, whispering each one. His voice cracked when he reached the end. "They trusted us," he said quietly, "and we left them in the dark." Scout's ears flicked toward the door. He rose suddenly and barked, low and warning. Marcus grabbed the flashlight and opened the door. The air was still, but the scent of gasoline drifted faintly on the wind. He scanned the cemetery. nothing but shadows and gravestones. Then, at the far end near the poplars, he saw it. Fresh tire tracks, mud glistening under the moonlight. Someone had been there recently. Marcus crouched, touching the damp impression. The tread was wide, military-grade, heavy truck tires. Scout sniffed and whined softly. Whoever had been there had tried to conceal the tracks with shovelfuls of dirt. He returned to the cabin uneasy. There was no one to call. He didn't trust the local sheriff, and the military authorities had already brushed him off. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temple. "They're watching," he whispered. Scout rested his head on Marcus's knee, eyes steady, as if reminding him that he wasn't alone. He decided to take one more step, return to the old base, Sector 9 itself. It lay 30 miles west, now fenced and labeled as Restricted Environmental Zone. He hadn't been there in decades, but he needed to see it, needed proof. Before dawn, Marcus loaded a backpack, a flashlight, water, an old compass, a handheld metal detector, and a folded map. Scout hopped into the truck without hesitation, tail thumping once. The road wound through pine valleys and broken hills until the landscape opened into a barren plain. The sign came into view. U.S. property, no trespassing, hazardous area. The letters peeled like dead skin. He parked at the tree line and cut the engine. Silence swelled. Even the birds avoided this place. Scout leapt out, nose to the ground, weaving between scrub and stone. Marcus followed, boots crunching over gravel. The air was dry but smelled faintly of oil and old fire. They reached the edge of a crater half hidden by weeds. Marcus recognized it instantly, the storage yard. He knelt, touching the soil. It was blackened but compact, undisturbed for years. Scout began digging near a patch of collapsed earth. Within minutes, his claws struck metal. Marcus joined him, clearing the dirt with trembling hands until the object emerged, a fragment of corrugated steel, painted with faded stencil letters. BR7 HQ. He froze. It wasn't just a storage site. It had been the command post. The supposed fuel depot explosion had taken out their headquarters, not their supply yard, meaning someone had detonated it from within. Marcus sat back, heart pounding. "My God," he whispered. "They never stood a chance." Scout whined softly, pawing at another spot nearby. Marcus leaned closer and saw the outline of something buried deeper. A line of old dog tags fused together by rust, 17 of them strung like a broken chain. His breath caught. He touched the cold metal, dirt falling away to reveal the faint etching of a name. Peter Voss. For a long moment the wind stopped. The world felt still, reverent. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat thick with the weight of years. "We found you," he murmured. "All of you." Scout leaned against his leg, silent, as if bowing his head in salute. When they left, the sun was climbing behind the ridge, spilling pale gold across the ruins. Marcus looked back once, eyes stinging from dust and memory. He knew this was only the beginning. The earth had told its part. Now he needed the truth from the living. The air in the Colorado foothills had turned brittle with winter. Frost clung to the iron fences of the cemetery, and the sky bled gray behind the mountain ridge. Marcus Dean sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents spread before him. The discovery at Sector 9, the chained dog tags, the rusted steel, the names of the fallen, had left him restless, his sleep haunted by faces he could almost remember. Scout lay nearby, his bandaged paw twitching in uneasy dreams. The old shepherd had torn the skin digging through the dirt, but he refused to stay off his feet. Duty ran in both their veins. Marcus typed a formal letter to the Department of Defense, requesting a reopening of the Bravo 7 incident under the Freedom of Information Act. His words were measured, factual, but each keystroke felt like hammering a nail through the lid of a coffin that someone had sealed decades ago. He included the photos he'd taken, of the crater, the metal fragments, and the fused tags. At the end, he added one line that wasn't bureaucratic at all. They were soldiers. They deserved names, not dirt. 3 days passed with no reply. Then came the silence that wasn't silence, the kind that hums through the telephone line after you hang up with a stranger who knows too much. The postman, a friendly young man named Calvin Ross, delivered the mail that afternoon. Calvin was tall and wiry, with sunburned freckles and a perpetual half-grin that masked his curiosity. "You all right out here, Mr. Dean?" he asked, shifting the mailbag. "You've had 2 black SUVs drive up your road this week. Thought maybe the cemetery got famous." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Probably the VA doing surveys," he lied. Calvin shrugged but lingered, clearly uneasy. "Well, I'm supposed to remind you. The fire warnings are up. Dry season's early this year. Be careful with that old generator." Marcus nodded, and Calvin waved before disappearing down the path. That night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He sat by the window, the lamp dim, the documents hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Scout's ears twitched at every sound, his amber eyes scanning the dark. When the phone rang, Marcus jumped. He picked it up, and a voice rasped on the other end, familiar, gravelly, worn by years of command. "Marcus Dean." A pause. "It's Heller." Marcus gripped the receiver tighter. "You know why I'm calling?" Heller continued. "We need to talk, in person." 2 hours later, headlights sliced through the trees. A black sedan stopped outside the gate, and Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Heller stepped out. He looked older than Marcus remembered, his once rigid frame softened by age, but his eyes still sharp and assessing. His neatly trimmed silver hair reflected the porch light. The cold wind carried the faint scent of cologne and smoke. He wore a dark wool coat, his gloved hands clasped behind his back like a man still used to giving orders. "Still living among the dead, I see," Heller said, his tone half amused, half resentful. Marcus opened the door wider. "They don't lie to me," he replied. Heller stepped inside. The fire in the stove glowed low. He looked around the cramped cabin, his gaze pausing on the dog sleeping near the door. "Same dog?" Marcus nodded. "Same soldier?" The 2 men sat opposite each other, the table between them like a front line. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "You signed the report, Heller. Bravo 7. 17 men listed as dead. But I found their tags, their remains. Why the lies?" Heller's jaw tightened. "Because command demanded it." His voice carried the weight of years and compromise. "The explosion wasn't the enemy's doing. It was ours. Faulty coordinates, bad intel, a misplaced order from above. When the blast went off, headquarters panicked. They couldn't admit it publicly. So they scrubbed the mission, buried the site, and turned them into martyrs." Marcus leaned forward, eyes dark. "You knew." "I followed orders," Heller said, his voice brittle. "I was told to classify the loss as accidental. It saved hundreds of careers, maybe the entire battalion's reputation. You think anyone would have cared about 17 nameless bodies in the desert?" "I cared," Marcus said quietly. "And so would they." For the first time, Heller's mask cracked. His shoulders sagged, and his gaze dropped to his hands. "You think I sleep? I see them every night. Voss, Lee, Daniels. I hear them screaming in the static of my radio. I tried to forget. But then you started digging, and suddenly every door I thought was sealed opened again." Marcus stood, pacing. "So you came here to confess?" Heller shook his head. I came to warn you. They don't want this story out. The men who gave the order, they're still alive, and they've built entire careers on those deaths. If you keep pushing, you'll end up like Bravo 7. Gone. Erased. Marcus studied him carefully. Then why tell me at all? Heller exhaled shakily. Because I'm tired of ghosts. As the older man spoke, Marcus subtly slid his hand beneath the table, pressing the record button on a small voice recorder he had hidden there. The tape spun silently, capturing every word. Heller rubbed his temple, the years showing in his trembling fingers. There's something else. Sector 9 wasn't the first. There were others. 2 incidents scrubbed the same way. I don't have the files, but someone does. They're keeping them off the grid. Who? Marcus asked. Someone inside Defense Archives. Goes by the alias Maven. If you want proof, you'll need her. The name struck him. Vague, almost mythic. Heller rose to leave. At the doorway, he turned. Burn that tape, Marcus, for your own good. He stepped into the cold, shutting the door behind him. Hours later, Marcus was awakened by scouts growling. The smell of smoke crept under the door before he even opened his eyes. Flames flickered through the window glass. The porch was already burning. Marcus grabbed the recorder and the waterproof folder of documents. Out, boy! He shouted. Scout barked once, then lunged toward the back door. Heat blistered the walls as they stumbled outside into the icy wind. Sparks rained across the grass, landing on Scout's back. The dog yelped, then shook himself, and kept moving. Marcus turned in time to see the cabin roof cave inward, the explosion sending a burst of cinders into the night sky. When the fire department arrived, it was too late. The cabin was reduced to blackened timbers. The sheriff, a stout man named Randy Lowe, took Marcus's statement by flashlight. Lowe had a blunt face, a trimmed mustache, and the casual arrogance of a man too comfortable with tragedy. Faulty wiring, he said dismissively, glancing at the ruins. That's what happens with these old places. It wasn't the wiring, Marcus replied. It was arson. Lowe sighed. You got enemies, Mr. Dean? Someone who'd want you dead? Just the truth, Marcus said. Scout limped to his side, fur singed but eyes clear. The sheriff crouched to pet him, but stopped when the dog growled low in his throat. Suit yourself, Lowe muttered, straightening. We'll file the report. Don't expect miracles. By dawn, Marcus stood amid the ashes, smoke curling like ghosts around his boots. He clutched the recorder in his pocket, the tape intact. Scout pressed close to his leg, tail still. Marcus watched the sunrise burn through the smoke. They tried to bury it again, he whispered, voice hoarse. But we'll dig it up twice if we have to. Behind him, the sheriff's car disappeared down the road, leaving him alone with the ruin. Marcus turned back to the cemetery. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered names. Scout lifted his head, nose twitching toward the east. Somewhere out there lay the next piece of truth. And now, someone named Maven who might hold it. Marcus tightened his grip on the recorder. Come on, partner, he said. We've got work to do. The snow melted late that spring, leaving the cemetery damp and silent, its air heavy with thawed earth and memory. Marcus Dean stood by the new marker near the cabin ruins, where the smell of smoke had finally faded. In his pocket lay a small recorder, the same one that had survived the fire. Its contents had already traveled farther than he ever could. Someone had leaked the audio to the Veterans Herald, an independent paper run by former soldiers. Within a week, the story exploded across national news. Words like cover-up, dishonor, and mass deception filled headlines. The ghosts of Bravo 7 were no longer buried. They had been unearthed, and America was listening. Marcus didn't crave the attention. He only wanted peace for those 17 names. Yet peace was not what followed. News vans began parking along the gravel road near the gates, and strangers with cameras leaned over the fence. He ignored them, focusing instead on his duty. Scout, his ever-loyal companion, had recovered from the burns, though the fur on his back bore a permanent patch of white. He limped slightly when the weather cooled, but he still followed Marcus wherever he went, tail low, eyes always scanning the horizon. The government, forced by public outrage, had launched a full-scale investigation. Excavation crews from the Defense Archaeology Division were deployed to Sector 9. Marcus was invited to attend as an honorary witness. He didn't want the title, but he went because he owed it to the brothers who never came home. At the dig site, the landscape was almost unrecognizable. Machines hummed, tents flapped in the wind, and rows of floodlights illuminated the crater where Marcus and Scout had once stood in silence. The project was led by Dr. Lillian Kerr, a forensic anthropologist in her early 40s with a quiet authority that commanded respect. She was tall, lean, and moved with the precise grace of someone who spent her life among fragile things. Her auburn hair was tied in a practical knot, and her freckled face bore the weary patience of a scientist who had seen too many ghosts and too few truths. She greeted Marcus with a gloved handshake. "Mr. Dean," she said, voice even, eyes observant but kind. "Your discovery made this possible. We'll do everything we can to give them back their names." Marcus nodded, his voice rough. "They've been waiting long enough." Over the next several days, he watched as teams carefully removed layers of dirt, inch by inch. Scout stayed close to him, sitting quietly beside the observation tent, head occasionally tilting as if listening to something beneath the ground. The dog seemed to understand that this was sacred work. By the third day, the first fragment appeared. A boot heel, charred but intact. Then came more. Bones arranged in the haunting order of human formation, a buckle, a watch, a rusted rifle barrel. 17 distinct sets of remains began to take shape in the shallow pit. The air grew heavier each time a new artifact surfaced. Some of the workers whispered prayers under their breath. When one of the younger technicians, Corporal Isaac Torres, a compact man with close-cropped black hair and a nervous energy, found a battered insignia pin, he called out, "Sir, I think this one's Bravo 7. The insignia bore the faint outline of a falcon clutching a lightning bolt. Marcus felt his chest tighten. That was their unit crest. Dr. Kerr lifted it with tweezers, examining the corroded edges. 17 bodies, she murmured, and all accounted for within the same collapse pattern. This wasn't an explosion. It was a detonation from below. The ground buckled first. She glanced at Marcus. "Your lieutenant didn't die instantly. Some of them were trapped when the hillside fell." The words hit him like shrapnel. He imagined the suffocating dark, the cries for help that never reached the surface. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "Then we failed them twice," he whispered. Dr. Kerr said nothing, only placed a hand on his shoulder, a brief human gesture amid the sterile procedures. 2 weeks later, the remains were transported to Fort Carson for official identification. DNA matched every name Marcus had read aloud for years: Daniels, Lee, Price, Voss, and the others. Each one would receive full military honors. The Secretary of Defense made a public apology, televised across the nation. Marcus watched it from the cemetery gate, standing beside Scout. The apology meant little to him. It was words. The only truth that mattered was under the soil. The day of the ceremony arrived under a clear blue sky. The entire cemetery was alive with color and sound, rows of uniforms, polished brass, and flags rippling in the wind. The 17 caskets, each draped in the American flag, stood side by side like a long-forgotten formation finally standing at attention. Heller was there too, thinner now, his uniform stripped of insignia. He approached Marcus quietly. His eyes were sunken, his voice lower, humbled. "I wanted to see it," he said. Marcus regarded him with a long silence. "Then stand with them. Not for redemption. Just respect." Heller nodded once and stepped back into the crowd. When the honor guard raised their rifles for the 21-gun salute, Scout sat upright, ears alert. The first volley cracked through the air, echoing across the valley like distant thunder. The second volley came, then the third. And as the final notes of the bugle's taps drifted into the wind, Scout rose to his feet. He let out 3 long, deep barks, each one measured, mournful, and proud. Then he lay down at the base of Peter Voss's flag-covered coffin, resting his head on his paws. Marcus knelt beside him, tears burning his eyes. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "They're home now." The ceremony ended as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting gold across the marble stones. People slowly dispersed, their voices fading into the soft hum of evening. Marcus remained kneeling beside Scout, feeling the warmth of the dog's body against his hand. For the first time in years, there was peace in the air, still heavy, but clean. That night, Marcus fell asleep in his small cabin rebuilt by volunteer veterans. The stars outside burned bright and cold. In his dreams, he heard marching boots, 17 pairs, and a dog's quiet bark echoing between them. When dawn came, the world was gentle. Marcus stepped outside to find Scout lying by the monument of Bravo 7, where the flags from the ceremony still fluttered in the breeze. The shepherd was motionless, his fur kissed by sunlight, his body curled as if in rest. His head lay on the small bronze emblem of the unit, a falcon and a bolt. His chest did not rise. Marcus sank to his knees. For a long time he couldn't move. Then he smiled through tears and whispered, "You stood your last watch, soldier. You can rest now." The wind stirred through the pines, soft and solemn, carrying the faint echo of a bugle's song over the hills. In the silence that followed, it was as if 17 men and 1 faithful dog were saluting together one last time. Spring returned to Colorado with a strange gentleness, as if the land itself had decided to breathe again after a long mourning. The snow line had receded, the pines glistened under new leaves, and the wind that once carried the smell of ash now brought the faint sweetness of grass. Marcus Dean stood at the center of the veterans' cemetery, his hands calloused and red from labor. For months, he had overseen the construction of the new monument, one built not by government contract, but by the hands of volunteers, fellow soldiers, and strangers moved by the story of Bravo 7 and their loyal dog. The memorial was simple but powerful. A semicircle of white marble engraved with the names of the 17 men who had died in silence and shame. In the middle stood a single bronze plaque, newly polished, its inscription catching the sunlight. They were never lost, only waiting to be found. Below it, smaller, humbler, was a stone bearing the words Marcus had chosen himself. Scout, K9 Guardian of the Fallen. He ran his fingertips over the letters. The grooves were deep, deliberate, like the scars that never truly fade but somehow shape what remains. Scout had been gone for almost a year, buried beside the Bravo 7 brothers he had waited for. Even now, Marcus half expected to see that familiar sable shape trotting up the hill, ears perked, ready for duty. The dedication ceremony had drawn hundreds. Old veterans in worn uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with families, students, and townsfolk who had never met the men whose names they now honored. Some brought flowers, others stood silently with hats pressed to their chests. Reporters had come too, though this time their cameras stayed respectfully still. At the podium, Marcus cleared his throat. His voice was low and gravelly but steady. "They weren't heroes because they died," he said. "They were heroes because they stood together when everything else fell apart. We buried the truth once. Then we dug it back up. Now we make sure it never sleeps again." Applause rippled through the crowd, soft and sincere. A few heads bowed. Somewhere behind the crowd, the church bell rang, its deep tone echoing across the valley. After the ceremony, Marcus lingered as the sun dipped low, painting the marble in gold and rose. He wasn't alone. Clara Voss, a woman in her early 30s, approached him quietly. She had her father's eyes, clear, blue-gray, searching. Her hair, dark auburn like autumn bark, was tied back in a modest braid. She wore a faded army green jacket, too large for her small frame. Its cuffs rolled above delicate wrists. Clara was Peter Voss's daughter, a historian by trade, quiet by nature and carrying the quiet determination of someone who had waited her whole life to see justice given a name. "Mr. Dean," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you." Marcus turned, the lines around his eyes deepening into a smile that was equal parts pain and pride. "You don't owe me thanks. I just did what any brother would." Clara shook her head. "No. You gave me my father back. My mother died before she knew what really happened. I wish she could have seen this." Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied it. "I've been going through his letters. He wrote about you." Marcus blinked. "He did?" She nodded, opening a small notebook she carried. Inside was a weathered envelope, its paper yellowed with age. She handed it to him. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sharp, disciplined, Sergeant Peter Voss's script. Marcus unfolded it carefully. The letter was dated 2 days before the explosion. "Marcus, if this reaches you, it means I didn't make it back. Don't blame yourself. None of this is on you. If command ever buries us, promise me one thing. Don't let them bury the truth with us. Keep watch, like you always did. That's your gift, brother. You see the things the rest of us look away from." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he refolded the paper. He swallowed the lump in his throat. He always knew more than he let on. Clara smiled faintly. "I think he trusted you to finish what he couldn't." She placed a small object on the base of the monument, a dog tag, cleaned and polished. "He's home now, and Scouts with him." As twilight descended, the crowd drifted away, leaving Marcus alone among the rows of white stones. The wind shifted, rustling the pines, carrying with it the faint ring of the church bell from town. He walked slowly toward the ridge where Scout's grave lay. It was marked simply, beside the others, surrounded by small stones and patches of wild violets that had begun to bloom again. He knelt, resting his hand on the earth. "You did your part, old boy," he murmured. "Now it's on me." He sat there for a long time, the quiet broken only by the distant call of a hawk. When he finally stood, he noticed something at the edge of the clearing. A movement, low and cautious. Out from between the gravestones padded a young German shepherd, barely a year old. Its coat was darker than Scout's, almost black along the spine, but the eyes were the same deep amber. A small leather collar hung loose around its neck, with a tag that read Echo. The dog approached Marcus slowly, sniffing the air, then sitting at his feet as though waiting for instruction. Marcus crouched and scratched behind its ear. "You're his, aren't you?" he whispered. Echo tilted his head, then looked toward the row of graves, ears twitching at the sound of the wind. From that day on, the people of the town began to notice the young shepherd, too. Each year, on the anniversary of the Bravo 7 discovery, Echo would wander into the cemetery at dawn and lie down by Scout's grave. No one ever saw who brought him there, and no one tried to chase him away. He never barked, never stirred, just kept vigil until sunset, then vanished back into the woods. The old veterans called him the second guardian. As years passed, Marcus grew slower, but not weaker. His hair turned silver, his steps careful, but his gaze remained the same, steady, searching, alive. He tended the graves daily, his shadow long against the morning light. Sometimes he'd bring 2 cups of coffee, setting one by Scout's stone before sipping his own. "Still watching, aren't you?" he'd say with a faint smile. One winter, as snow began to fall again over Colorado, Marcus stood on the hill overlooking the cemetery. The town below glowed with lanterns, preparing for the annual remembrance ceremony. Echo was there, lying at the foot of the monument, tail wrapped neatly around his legs. Marcus placed a hand on the cold marble and whispered the same words he had once spoken when Scout was buried. "They're at rest now. And you still keep your promise for us all." The wind answered him, sweeping through the pines like a sigh of gratitude. In the distance, the church bell rang once, slow and deep, followed by the faint hum of taps from a trumpet in town. Marcus stayed until the last light faded from the horizon. Then he turned toward home, his heart both heavy and light. Behind him, Echo raised his head, ears pricking at the sound of Marcus's boots fading down the path. The dog did not move. He simply looked out over the field of white markers, silent and vigilant, as though carrying on a watch that would never truly end. In the end, the Guardian's oath reminds us that faith often lives quietly, within loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to tell the truth, even when the world looks away. Some miracles do not arrive in flashes of light. They come in the form of a soldier's redemption, a dog's unbroken vigil, or the whisper of wind that feels like forgiveness. Perhaps God's greatest work is not the erasure of pain, but the strength He grants us to endure it and to keep love alive beyond death. If this story touched you, share it so that others may remember the unseen guardians in their own lives. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of hope, courage, and grace. May God bless you and those you hold dear, and may His quiet miracles find you in the moments you least expect them.